Hello friends, in this video we are going to discover the top 11 most expensive cities to live in the United States 2024. The most expensive cities in the US are usually costly for a good reason, several, really. Residents are willing to pay extra for everything from housing to food to gas if it allows them to live someplace with a wealth of employment opportunities or great weather. Others are looking for cosmopolitan living, with a host of restaurants, museums and other cultural options on tap. However, in some cases, simple isolation plays a leading role in high prices. When pretty much everything has to be imported over long supply lines, prices are bound to be higher. To determine just how much the most expensive cities to live in the US really cost, we turn to the latest data from the Council for Community and Economic Research. Its cost of living index collects scores upon scores of prices across 265 urban areas, covering housing, groceries, utilities, transportation, healthcare, and miscellaneous goods and services, such as getting your hair done or going to a movie. We also gathered data on household incomes, home prices, and unemployment rates for each city to provide context for local living costs. Kindly make sure to hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon before we start this video about the 11 most expensive cities to live in the United States. Now let's dig deeper into each of the top 11 most expensive cities to live in the United States. Number 11. San Diego. San Diego, with its miles of beaches and nearly ideal climate, is paradise for those who love the outdoors. Be it surfing, sailing, hiking, biking, golfing or just exploring Balboa Park, this city on the Pacific has something for everyone. And for those who prefer more sedentary activities, San Diego offers a world-class zoo, museums, professional sports teams and a wide-ranging restaurant scene. Top employers include the US Navy, Qualcomm and the University of California, San Diego. So, what's not to like? Well, living in San Diego can really stretch a budget. Housing costs are 122% higher than the national average. The average home price in San Diego stands at a whopping $1 million versus a national average of $452,510. Average apartment rent comes to $3,057 a month, versus the US average of $1,369. And the bleeding doesn't stop there. Groceries, utilities, and miscellaneous goods and services all cost about 12% more than what the typical American pays. Transportation expenses are especially stiff, or nearly 32% higher than the US average. Helpfully, California ranks as one of the most tax-friendly states for middle-class families. Number 10. Oakland, California. Oakland anchors one corner of a sort of Bermuda Triangle around San Francisco Bay where affordable prices go missing. The second corner is San Francisco, as famous for its sky-high real estate as it is for Alcatraz and Fisherman's Wharf. The third corner is Silicon Valley, home to tech giants handing out six-figure salaries like candy on Halloween. Compared to its neighbors to the west and south, Oakland might seem a bargain. But consider this, although median household income in Oakland is 18% higher than the national level, median home values are 3 times higher than the US median. Rents and other costs for keeping a roof over one's head are similarly elevated in Oakland. Total housing-related expenses are almost triple the national average, according to C2ER. Groceries, utilities, transportation and healthcare costs all run roughly a third more than what the typical American pays. Number 9. Boston, Massachusetts. With its unparalleled collection of universities, hospitals, historical sites, and tech and biotech employers, it's easy to see why Boston is such an appealing place to live. And while there's no question the city's popularity comes at a high cost, it's not nearly as high as some East Coast cities that are often mentioned in the same breath as Boston. After all, the high concentrations of students, recent grads, and young professionals require some level of affordability to get by while they're starting out. Groceries, for example, are only 14% more expensive than the national average. Healthcare runs 20% more than what the typical American pays, and miscellaneous goods and services are 21% more pricey. Housing-related costs, however, are a killer, or 124% higher than the national average. Renters and homeowners pay more than twice the national average for their domiciles. For example, the average apartment rents for $3,747 a month in Boston. That compares with a national average of $1,369 a month, according to C2ER. The average price of a Boston home comes to $921,897 versus $452,510 nationally. In another blow to residents' wallets, Massachusetts isn't particularly tax-friendly to middle-class families or retirees. Number 8. Seattle, Washington. Just a few years ago, Seattle's economy was as hot and strong as its coffee, which put relentless upward pressure on prices. It's not hard to divine why. As a major hub for the technology industry, Seattle is awash in high-paid jobs. Microsoft and Amazon.com are both based in the area, as are many smaller high-tech companies. As with every city on this list, housing costs are the main driver of Seattle's sticker shock. Housing-related costs, including insurance, for renters and homeowners are more than 3 times the U.S. average, according to C2ER. But the high prices hardly end there. Groceries, transportation, healthcare, and miscellaneous goods and services run anywhere from 24% to 32% higher than what the typical American pays. Utilities, however, run only about 5% above the national average. Although the state of Washington presents a mixed picture when it comes to taxes on retirees, it does happen to be one of the most tax-friendly states for middle-class families. Number 7. Los Angeles, California. Few cities can top Los Angeles for excess and glamour, but most of its residents don't work in Hollywood or shop on Rodeo Drive. While high living expenses make LA one of the most expensive cities to live in the U.S., median annual incomes are a paltry $655 above the national level. And yet the allure of the nation's second-largest city remains strong. From Hollywood to Beverly Hills to Venice Beach, few cities can claim as many famous locales. For those who seek culture beyond the Kardashians, LA boasts a number of important museums and the world-class Los Angeles Philharmonic. Just be forewarned that LA's notorious traffic helps push transportation costs 29% above the national average. And although groceries, utilities, healthcare, and miscellaneous goods and services are only about 12% to 17% costlier than the U.S. average, housing bleeds residents dry. Indeed, housing-related expenses, including rents and mortgages, run almost 140% above the national average in Los Angeles. For example, the average price of a home in LA comes to $1.1 million, versus the national average of $452,510. Average rent, meanwhile, is 2.3 times higher than the U.S. average. Lastly, there's another thing that's unhelpfully elevated in the City of Angels. While the U.S. unemployment rate sits at 50-year lows, Los Angeles's rate stands well above 5%. Number 6. Orange County, California. Orange County, known as the OC for short, is synonymous with wealth, so much so there was an entire TV series made about it in the 2000s. Several large municipalities make up the county, which abuts Los Angeles to the southeast, including Anaheim, Santa Ana, and Irvine. But it's the smaller, tonier enclaves such as Newport Beach, median home value, $2 million, that cement Orange County's reputation for sheltering some of Southern California's richest and most famous. In fact, the average home price for all of Orange County sits at $1.2 million according to C2ER. That makes it the 5th priciest market in the country. However, at $2,919 a month, apartment rents are only a bit more than twice the national average. All in all, housing in the OC costs 156% more than what the typical American pays. Other budget stressors include groceries, which cost about 12% more than the U.S. average, and transportation, which is 29% pricier. On the other side of the ledger, healthcare costs are slightly lower than the national average, and utilities are about 10% cheaper. Number 5. Washington, District of Columbia. The nation's capital is a tale of two cities when it comes to living costs. Housing-related expenses, including rents and mortgages, are by far the most burdensome at 2.5 times the national average, according to C2ER, but other expenses aren't too bad. In fact, DC healthcare costs are a bit below the national average. Groceries run about 9% above the national average, while utilities are about 12% more expensive. Miscellaneous goods and services are pricier by 19%. Happily, transportation expenses aren't overly onerous, at less than 9% above the U.S. average. A wide-ranging bus and metro system makes getting to and around the District of Columbia affordable. The DC Circulator bus, for example, costs just $1 and its routes reach popular spots including Georgetown, Union Station, and the National Mall. And, of course, numerous museums and historical sites are free to visit, too. Be that as it may, the average price of a home in DC stands at $1.2 million. Meanwhile, the average apartment rents for $3,320 a month, or $1,851 a month more than the U.S. average. Number 4. Brooklyn, New York. Technically, Brooklyn is one of the 5 boroughs that make up New York City, but in the past couple of decades it has emerged as something of a metropolis unto itself. Indeed, if Brooklyn were an independent city, its population would be on par with Chicago, the 3rd largest city in the nation. Once upon a time, Brooklyn was considered a viable alternative for those who couldn't afford to live in Manhattan. Not anymore. Housing-related expenses, including rents and mortgages, are almost 4 times higher than the national average. And yet, the median household income in Brooklyn is actually lower than the U.S. median. It's also almost $17,000 lower than the median household income in Manhattan. Happily, not everything in Brooklyn is eye-wateringly expensive. Healthcare and utilities costs are only about 6% higher than their respective national averages. And transportation expenses run just 14% above what the typical American pays. Groceries and miscellaneous goods and services, however, are both about a quarter more expensive than their U.S. averages. Number 3. San Francisco, California. Years of relentless growth driven by high-paid tech workers have given San Francisco some of the highest living costs in the country, meaning even those with fat paychecks can struggle to make ends meet. Houses are famously expensive, a seemingly insurmountable obstacle for aspiring homeowners. The average home price is a staggering $1.5 million in San Francisco, according to C2ER's Cost of Living Index, and the median home value is by far the highest among the 11 most expensive cities to live in the U.S. Renters don't fare much better. The average rent for an apartment in San Francisco is $3,585 a month. That's 2.6 times the national average. Indeed, overall, housing-related costs in San Francisco are more than 4 times greater than the national average. And the nosebleed prices don't stop there. Groceries, utilities, healthcare and transportation expenses all run anywhere from 30% to almost 40% more than what the typical American pays. Even miscellaneous goods and services are nearly a quarter more expensive than the national average. Number 2. Honolulu, Hawaii. To enjoy the perks of living in such a remote Pacific paradise, Honolulu residents pay more than they would on the mainland for pretty much everything, and it's not hard to understand why. Most goods sold in Hawaii must arrive either by boat or by plane, which jacks up the price considerably. Honolulu has by far the most expensive groceries of all 265 urban areas surveyed for by C2ER. For example, milk and bananas cost almost twice the national average, while potatoes are about 3 times more expensive. Overall, a trip to the supermarket costs 50% more than what a shopper would shell out back on the mainland. Bills take a big bite out of folks' paychecks too. Utilities cost 41% more than what folks pay on the U.S. mainland. Transportation is 25% more expensive, and locals shell out upwards of 18% more for healthcare. But, as always, housing is the biggest income eater. Housing-related costs are more than 3 times the national average in Honolulu. Heck, the average home carries a price of $1.6 million. Residents do catch at least one break when it comes to their finances. Hawaii is among the more tax-friendly states for middle-class families, and is one of the most tax-friendly states for retirees. Number 1. Manhattan, New York. If you've ever been to Manhattan, you don't need us to tell you that it's an expensive place to visit. But it's even more expensive to live there. With space at a premium and location paramount, the median home value in Manhattan is second only to San Francisco on our list of most expensive cities to live in. The U.S. average apartment rent stands at a stunning $4,569 a month, blowing away every other city tracked by C2ER. Meanwhile, the average home price is $2.4 million. The budget busting doesn't stop there. Residents pay a premium of 35% at the grocery store, while transportation runs 16% above average. Meanwhile, miscellaneous goods and services are 37% more expensive. For example, if you want to go to the movies, you'll pay 60% more for a ticket. Yoga classes cost almost double the national average. All of this and more conspire to make Manhattan the most expensive city in the nation, by a lot. By the way, you'll need to like crowds if you hope to make it in the Big Apple. Manhattan packs in almost 70,000 residents per square mile, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. For context, San Francisco, which has one of the highest population densities in the U.S., hosts a mere 17,376 residents per square mile. So, which is your favorite cities among the top 11 most expensive cities to live in the United States? Well, that's all we have for you today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the content of this video, click the subscribe button so you can receive more content like this. Post your favorite places among the top 11 most expensive cities to live in the United States in the comments below. I'd love to read them and I'm sure others would too.